As soon as Elizabeth becomes sovereign over England, she will change her entire self-image. She will no longer be a feminine princess, but instead a divine mother and a king. Elizabeth will use her portraits to propagate her virginity and androgyny to her kingdom in order to legitimize her rule as a woman. Here we see a young Princess Elizabeth about age 13 in a portrait that is fulfilling traditional expectations of femininity for England in the 16th century, with things like small shoulders and a small waist. Her gown is woven with a pomegranate pattern, and the pomegranate is a fruit that symbolizes fertility. This young Elizabeth was not in control of her own image. She was simply a princess being marketed as a young, pious, and fertile potential bride. The principal role of a royal female was to marry and produce heirs, regardless of how noble and strong the woman may have been. Elizabeth became Queen of England in 1558 at the age of 25. Her coronation portrait was one of her earliest exercises in projecting her kingly authority. She aligned herself with a familiar portrait of King Richard II that hung in Westminster Abbey, and it's one of the oldest surviving portraits of an English monarch. This connection with another king is a way to symbolize the transfer of the king's body politic to Elizabeth I. The king has two bodies, the body natural, which you are born with, and the body politic, which is transferred from monarch to monarch. This idea of the body politic inspired Elizabeth to be an androgynous monarch. As a princess, Elizabeth would have had to been very chaste and pious in order to be married off to a good husband, because during the late 16th century, finding a husband and producing heirs was your main role as a woman. Even Elizabeth's older sister, Mary Tudor, attempted to fulfill this role, even as queen. A woman who was married was subordinate to her husband, like Mary Tudor, and a woman not in control of her virginity was seen as unstable, immoral, and weak. This was something that Elizabeth I could not be. Elizabeth had to dress chaste and project her virginity in order to prove that she was morally worthy of such a powerful and masculine position as being head of the monarchy. Elizabeth addresses her body natural, which is a woman's body, but she puts it under a perfect light. She has long flowing hair, which is a sign of youthfulness, a small waist, a sign of beauty, and she's drenched in pearls, which are a sign of her piety and virginity. She's acknowledging the body natural, but not as weak and feeble, but as perfect. Here we see the phoenix and the pelican portrait attributed to the artist Hilliard. Elizabeth's images become saturated in symbols of kingship and feminine piety as her reign continues. Her and her court artists become masters of walking the tightrope of androgyny. The phoenix is used as a symbol to tell a story of Elizabeth's two bodies, her feminine body natural and masculine body politic. After a phoenix dies, they soon rise out of the ashes and live again. I think this symbolizes Elizabeth's rise to power and how she rose from the limitations of her body natural to ascend to be a Queen of England. We see Elizabeth holding a red rose, which is a sign of virginity, but we also see that her hands are larger and elongated. She was once quoted as saying, "Don't you know that a king's hands are far in reaching?" And this was a reminder that she believed herself to be a king as a result of her body politic, and that's why she had Hilliard exaggerate their size. In the 17th century, the pelican was a symbol of maternal sacrifice. Elizabeth adopted this symbol. She sacrificed a traditional marriage and children in order to be the mother of her kingdom. This is another example of her not completely erasing her femininity, but instead elevating the role of motherhood to a divine stature as England's mother. Elizabeth in this portrait, and most of her portraits, is covered in pearls. Elizabeth raises her virginity to a divine stature and redefines herself as God's handmaid. She will never be able to marry a man because she is married to God and mother to England. And if she is only submissive to God, then her femininity does not have to abide by social norms. During this period, focusing on a woman's face or identity wasn't done because her personality and identity in portraiture wasn't thought to be important. Portraits of Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, are a perfect example of the lack of importance of capturing the naturalism and personality of a woman's face. But for Elizabeth, this wasn't the case. Elizabeth wanted to break from the gender norms of feminine portraiture by making sure she had an identifiable persona in all of the art made of her. The artist Hilliard composed what's called Elizabeth's Mask of Youth. He painted her portraits with this mask for over 30 years. Elizabeth still wants to make sure her portraiture blurs her gender and projects her virginity. Hilliard paints Elizabeth's face with the same basic features: a moon-like shaped head, which is associated with the virgin goddess Cynthia, and an elongated nose, chin, and forehead, which is evocative of masculinity and of her father, King Henry VIII. It's a public uniform of androgyny and purity. The Elizabeth we see here in the Ditchley portrait is Elizabeth nearing the end of her reign. She's an aged monarch only 11 years away from her death. I think this is a perfect portrait to use as an example of her evolution from a princess into a kingly symbol. She is embodying the symbol of monarch completely. Her body politic has completely enthralled her body natural. Her dress breaks from her proportions by about 3 or 4 times her width, and her height is also extended. She becomes a larger-than-life monarch, similar to the portrait of her father, Henry VIII. Elizabeth must still address her body natural. She has an extremely small feminine waist and little feet that seem like they're almost floating above the map, and she's decked out in lots of tiny pearls to remind her audience that yes, she is a woman, but she is the most pure woman. But all these feminine features are suffocated by the aspects of the painting that embody her body politic. Pope Sixtus once said of Elizabeth, "She is only a woman, only a mistress of half an island, and yet she makes herself feared by Spain, by France, by the Empire, by all." In a time when few women were able to pursue an education, Elizabeth I was able to convince her subjects that she could rule all of England by walking a tightrope of masculinity and femininity.